Hello.
Henrik, how are you?
I'm pretty good.
Great. So let me introduce Henrik. So our next session with Henrik Werdelin. Henrik's the co-founder of America's fastest growing pet brand, Bark, previously Bark Box, and his founding partner, Prehype, an incubator that helps entrepreneurs and companies build new ventures, companies like Roman in men's health, managed by Q and others. He's also the author of the recently published The Acorn Method, How Companies Get Growing Again, which is based on his experience having been part of startups that were acquired by Facebook, Microsoft, and WeWork, as well as advising companies like Coca-Cola, Novozymes, Citigroup, and many others. The Acorn Method offers a prescription for those interested in growing their organizations. If you have any questions for Henrik, please ask them in the chat, and we'll try to get to all of them. So Henrik, hi.
Hello.
Awesome. Can you tell me, maybe to start, a little bit about how some of your earliest experiences, like those at MTV, influenced you and your path ultimately to, starting a business like Bark?
Yeah, I think, I guess I sometimes have to remind people what MTV was, but back when I started my career, it was pretty cool. I was lucky that I started MTV just as the internet kind of was beginning in the late 90s. And so I had these two things. I got to play with a lot of new technology, and we had an audience because at the time MTV was very well watched. And my responsibility was to kind of build new products and services that was not TV shows in all countries outside the US. And so I really, I think, got introduced to how do you build new stuff from scratch inside a large organization, with all the pain and misery that kind of includes. But I also got to kind of think about how to do that a little bit more in a systematic way. At MTV at the time, we had about 110 channels in 164 countries. And so it wasn't kind of enough just to think of one thing. You have to think of a lot of things and build them out. And then I guess and this is different times, right? But I was a producer at the time, and I got asked to build a new TV show about the internet. And when my boss thought it was a bad idea, I took upon myself to break into the studio and transmit an hour of live TV, which back then didn't land you in jail, but as it seems, kind of got you promoted. And so I guess what I've learned from there was how do you really think about extending your product portfolio outside the core of your business, and how do you build systems to build those products and services at quite high velocity?
Tell us a little bit about Bark. So what is it? And then why has it continued to grow when so many other stuff in a box businesses have either failed or flatlined?
I think there's a lot of luck in startups. So let's, also be honest that I probably was fortunate. We've been fortunate. But I think, and I think, there's not, unfortunately for conferences and for headlines there, when something works, it tends not to be that there's just kind of like one thing that you did right. It was that you have hundreds of thousands of small things that kind of worked out. But a few kind of things that I've been thinking about with the success of Bark was we started an industry that hadn't seen a lot of innovation, but it was a very passionate kind of space. About a third of Americans have a dog, and at the time when we entered the market, it hadn't really seen a lot of innovation for a long time, neither on the product nor the marketing side. And so I think we kind of went into a little bit of a greenfield area. And so I think that's kind of was one defining thing. Big area with a lot of large companies that hadn't really been forced to rethink kind of what products and customers wanted, and also kind of what was their approach. And there was macro trends around that. You saw the humanization of dog kind of starting, around 10 years ago when we were starting that we kind of were able to kind of pick up on. I think secondly, we never saw ourselves as being in the business of putting stuff in a box. We saw ourselves as being in the business of making dogs and their people happy. And so I think when people normally kind of like look at how do you extend your business, they get very kind of anchored in the utility that they provide instead of the problem they're trying to solve. And I think we were fortunate that we were trying to solve a problem for ourselves. And so what drove us forward all the time was how do we make our own dogs happier? And so the products that we kind of build on the back of the box business wasn't necessarily another box business. While most of it is membership and subscription based, it was dental businesses and food businesses and content businesses and membership dog park services and stuff like that. And so I think we had somewhat of we were lucky that we were in a space with not a lot of newness, and we, I think, had a slightly different approach to how we are trying to tackle the problem.
Awesome. I think for a lot of people here, Amazon is viewed as an opportunity, but also a risk. Can you tell me a little bit about how Bark launched on Amazon and what can be learned from that experience?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's a very interesting example because set aside kind of like if you should launch on Amazon as a brand or not. We, I think, kind of took the approach of launching it almost like it was a completely new business. And so instead of just saying, here's like products that has been working in our box, let's just put them on and let's hire somebody who have a great deal of experience in Amazon. We almost saw it as a new startup. And so in that respect, to kind of follow the methodology of the Acorn method. And so I'd say in many ways, the hero of our Amazon success has been Whitney, who launched it. And Whitney was somebody who kind of got introduced to me through Jeff from Harry's, who had met her somewhere. And she is a entrepreneur from Australia and built a company there that didn't work out and had been very honest and open about, the learnings that she had and frankly, the pain and misery of kind of like having gone through raising money and then not succeeding. And when I met her, I thought she had a lot of the attributes that I really am looking for as an entrepreneurial person, which is not something that you normally kind of put in a job application. It's agitation. It is being able to be pretty versatile and pretty like having a lot of generic skills. It's about having gravity so she can get people to buy into her ideas. And so we basically gave her a budget and then let her loose on Amazon and said, basically come up with what you think we should sell and then come up with the best way of how we can sell it. And out of that came a number of new products that was tailored to that channel, both in terms of what it was. Our hero screw right now on Amazon is a bed. And so, but also how it was promoted and sold. And so I think a lot of times when people talk about, let's go out to a new distribution platform or let's launch in a new channel, there's this kind of idea that you can just take your normal team and your normal products and then just redeploy them. And I think what I took away from that experience was that you need to design products now for the channel. And you also need to look at how you structure your team and organize your team for that new channel, because the tactics that is required to be successful there is most likely ones that are different from the tactics that are required to be successful on other channels.
Right. And anything that can be learned, regarding attracting an entrepreneur to come and work and solve a problem that can be applied to, some of the companies in the audience. Like I'm sure, the world's biggest companies would love to have, a entrepreneur come and help them solve the Amazon riddle. Are there incentives or, do you give someone freedom? How do you get an entrepreneur to come to a business? And your business is not small, so it's not like she was joining a startup. What attracted her to come work for someone else?
I don't know. Well, there might have been a little bit of a bait and switch going on, but like I think the reality is that entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial people is not something that is binary. You're not like entrepreneurial or not. I think, even people who work in big companies, I see a tremendous amount of entrepreneurship there. And I guess I object to the idea that, I guess like this very one kind of like single mind view of an entrepreneur is like a young developer in San Francisco. For me, entrepreneurship and entrepreneurialism is really people who enjoy identifying problems and then finding scalable way of solving them. Right. And I think they come in many shapes and form. The reality, like if you take the whole US, like it's one of the most entrepreneurial countries in the world, right? If you just see, I can't remember the stats. And so I'll say what the stats that I think I remember it is, but it's something like half or 60% of the American workforce is employed by companies that have less than 10 people. So I think first thing is just to accept that entrepreneurs is not just always the same. Just because that you've been through a accelerator program or because that you've done something doesn't make you more or less entrepreneurial. And so first widen, like the advice is first widen a little bit the lens on kind of like how you look at it. I think secondly, what I find is that entrepreneurs comes in kind of like cycles. Like the reason why we launched Prehype to start with was I had sold a company and I didn't really know what to do next. And so I wanted to create a little bit of like a halfway house for entrepreneurial people. And I think what I realized by doing that is that, entrepreneurs go from, I want to solve a problem, try it out, like it works or it doesn't work. You get a little bit scarred. And then sometimes you have to find a place where you can have a little bit of a home for a while. And so entrepreneurs kind of come in these kind of like, their careers are in these cycles. And so you can find entrepreneurs when they're kind of like at the tail end of another project. And so I think that's also a good place to try to identify people. And to your initial question of like incentive and freedom, I think both. Now, I guess the problem is, of course, that most organizations can't change their incentive structure. Like it is difficult to provide equity in a new project to somebody, right. But you can create bonus structures that mirror some of those things. And I think a lot of entrepreneurial people I've met, while they definitely is kind of gaming for the upside and looking for the upside, they really just want to build stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I think the more that you can give them autonomy to and the structures to build something from scratch without having to run around and ask permission from everybody, I think the more that you're likely to find some of those people. I mean, maybe that's a little bit long-winded. I think it's a super good question, and I guess like there's not like a single kind of way to do it, but look broad and then kind of give people a lot of authority, build like permission for them to do that. I think it's good. And then, I mean, like most people have a good sense for people entrepreneurial. Like if most people who are watching this, if I ask them, who do you think might leave? Who of your colleagues might leave within the next year and start their own company, they'll probably have a few names that pop in their minds. And it's probably not a specific type or gender or role. It's just kind of like, that's the personality.
Great. Can we talk a little bit more about a problem or kind of jobs to be done related approach to launching new businesses? You mentioned Bark's focus has been not in getting into more boxes. There's no cat box. And so what is the philosophy with regards to kind of product development for Bark?
At Bark, we've always taken the approach that like a little bit of like a, let's say, naive or basic approach that if we can serve our customers very well and be really close to them, then they will keep being loyal to us and they will keep telling us what we should do next. And so in many ways, the secret of our product development roadmap is that we invested early in a very, I would say, aggressive customer service strategy, which meant that we have always been weighted in staff in what we call the habit team, which is really the people that the connecting tissue between us and our customers. And so we, as a goal, try to talk to as many customers as we can a month. And that often is about a third of our customer base that we have some kind of interaction with. And that could be anything from them calling and asking about a product to us calling them and asking if their dog sleeps on its back or on its paws. Now, the simple truth is that if you have a good relationship with a customer and you said, hey, what would you buy if we built it next? You get a pretty honest answer pretty quickly. And so from us going from basic plush toys to more kind of like outdoorsy and active toys to going into dental, a lot of that was fed by us just asking the customer, what can we build for you? What can we make for you?
Got it. And you mentioned kind of healthcare or pet care. You once started a vet business, and then you killed it. What
we did?
What facts? What can we learn from that?
We started something called Bark Care. I guess it must have been about 5 years ago, and the thought at the time was that when you have specifically a big dog and you live in, for example, New York City, it is tough to get your dog to the vet. And so we initially wanted to create a telemedicine service where you can call and just ask a vet question. And then when we didn't see enough traction with that, so we pivoted into basically vets on wheels. And so we had vets literally on Vespas kind of going out and serving dogs. I guess what we learned was twofold. One is people love the product. Like, we've never seen as high NPS. It was a very, very sticky product. The downside was the revenue wasn't growing as quickly as some of our other initiatives. And so I think what I learned, and as I describe also in the book that I wrote, The Acorn Method, sprouts, for them to survive, have to grow fast and they have to grow upwards. And if they don't, then other sprouts will basically take their sun and the water, and then the sprout that isn't growing as fast is going to wither and die. And I think in many ways we took the same approach with Bark Care. We basically loved the service, but we had a tough time seeing how we would be able to get the CAC to LTV dynamics that we enjoy in our business, and so we cut losses. And I think that it has always been a core principle of mine, is look at product development and look at ideation a little bit like a scientist, that spend a little bit less time overanalyzing stuff before you go and do it, but then be very rigid and loyal to the data that you see coming out of it. If it doesn't work, if it doesn't kind of live up to expectation, then kill it and then build something new.
Great. Maybe we can talk a little bit about retail, which is topical for a lot of reasons right now. You'd started as a digitally native business. Then you had a pretty original idea for a retail concept. And now you sell wholesale, both on Amazon as well as in stores. Can you talk a little bit about that idea and how that influenced your ultimate retail strategy?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. We started up by coming up with, I guess initially didn't want to be in brick and mortars. And so the first idea or experiment that we had in that space was to basically make a store where the dogs could shop themselves. And it was fed out of me sitting in the office and seeing that our office dogs would come in, and obviously in our office we have a big pile of toys, and so the dogs would go over to this pile and they wouldn't just grab the first toy. They would kind of like dig deep into the pile and find that specific toy that they were keen to play with for the day. And the more that we were building Bark, the more we realized that dogs are super individual and super unique, and you can't just expect that they all would like the same. And so we wanted to build a store that could cater for that. And what we came up with was one where we sewed RFIDs into the toys, and we gave the dogs these RFID vests on, and then we allowed their owners to basically sit in the beginning of the store, drinking a cup of coffee, while the dogs would run around in the store and basically play with the toys. And then at the end of the session, we would push to the owner's phone what kind of toys the dogs liked the most, and then we would, they would be able to buy them. Now, anecdotally, fun enough, it wasn't always that the owner then bought the toys the dogs played with the most. They bought the toy that they liked the most, which we can go back to another time. But I think what we what we really found out was that it was important for us to create a specific, an experience design around the shopping experience. And we then spent quite a lot of time kind of like understanding what had worked with that. And we were pretty vocal about that. And that led in part to us then getting called by a number of the large retailers. And so now you'll find our products in, I think, 17,000 stores, ranging from Target over CVS. And I think that kind of came from that project. And I think the learning I had was a little bit that you can't always predict how a project kind of like, how it turns out. We didn't start that retail project because we had hoped to end up in retail.
Right.
And I think part of experimentation and part of being an entrepreneurial soul and part of kind of like thinking about how do you build new from scratch is sometimes to build something, like use the philosophy of making is thinking, because these unpredictable things will start to emerge as you're building from scratch.
Got it. Retail wise, given the macro trends like pre-COVID, and this is a question from the audience, but also given the disruption of COVID, how do you think about the role of retail in your future? And this is offline retail, obviously.
I mean, like, you have other people that are going to come out in this conference, like Julie from who used to be at Chanel, who have a much better view than I do on this matter. I guess from a brand point of view, specifically from a brand point of view that are servicing a client that does not know how to use the internet, the dogs, we are keen to find more ways to get out there and meet the dogs and have them play with our toys in real life. And so there's definitely like a strong urge to find ways to do that. Would I be a guessing person? I mean, like if the only function that the retail has is that you go down to basically almost like a warehouse and buy a product that you already knew that you wanted, I would imagine online would do that in a more effective way. But for us specifically, the more that we can partner with retailers to come up with ways where dogs and their humans can come down and shop together, the more we'll be excited about it. And the more I think we can introduce dogs and humans to products that they might not even know were great for them. And so we're excited about that. I would imagine that we, that there, I mean, like COVID threw everybody off, right? And so I think, like we will start to see more and more experiences that will be in real life, that will be deemed safe enough. And so that might be dog parks first. But as things become more and more safe and we learn to live with the virus, then I think that we will try to come up with ways of creating experience design in stores. I'm not sure that was too helpful, but I mean, like, just having pure retail competing that with online, I think is tough for retail. And so we will have to reinvent how we're thinking about it.
Great. Another question from the audience is on subscription. Many different subscription services, people much more willing to pay for music and news and information on subscription. There's subscription product businesses like yours. How do you think about peak subscription? And when are we overwhelmed by having too many things coming at a regular interval?
I mean, like, I definitely think that we all look at our credit card statement every month and either get surprised with things we bought or go like, oh, do I really need that? And so, but I mean, like, I don't think necessarily that's a new thing, right? We've done that with our phone bills and our cable subscription and all those things for a long time. And so I do find subscription for a product like us to be very efficient for the customer, because that they know they want to keep their dogs happy and they like to have a predictable budget. And so in that way, it has a lot of advantages. I I think with most things, they swing in pendulums, right? Like then we see a lot of subscription, and we get excited about it, and we start to sign up, and then suddenly we go like, hey, wait a minute, like I'm having all these software and stuff that I bought, like online once, and now I'm paying subscription, and then we start to cancel that. And so I don't see it as much as a peak as I see kind of like that the pendulum will kind of like swing a little bit, and then it'll find like whatever medium that is appropriate for that specific customer.
Cool. In terms of where Bark markets and advertises and acquires new customers, what framework do you use to test and experiment with new channels? We have companies here like TikTok and Cameo that didn't exist a few years ago, and now they are where people are spending their time, and in the future, presumably there'll be even newer channels. How do you think about like testing and experimenting, and where to find tomorrow's customer?
I mean, like I find that new growth tactics is basically the new campaign, right? You find a new way of getting on top of the noise, and then the reality is that you have a limited time until everybody else realized that too, and then you have to come up with a new tactic.
Right.
And so the way that I think about it is that our marketing and growth initiatives is building up the muscle of coming up with new growth tactics at all time. And so we were, first on going very heavy on content marketing 10 years ago, and I think that has served us very well. Then sometimes new content platforms kind of pop up, excited about what we can do in TikTok,
right,
for example. And then sometimes they burn out and they become less relevant. And then you have to, as I mentioned earlier, just look at your numbers constantly and figure out if you could use the dry powder to something else. And so the way I think about it is, I'm an old school entrepreneur. I like CAC to LTV, right? Make sure your NPS is high so you don't do something that is bad for the customer, but you really look at that core metric. And I think you can, and then you need to kind of reserve some money to keep trying new things, conversational commerce, conversational content. I think you mentioned earlier that you made like some discovery about audio commerce, which when I heard that sounded exciting, and so I'll dig into that. So I think companies of tomorrow will have to have a very build-up muscle for coming up with new tactics that they can acquire customers at the price that they feel they can afford.
Great. And maybe lastly, given your experiences both at Bark and at Prehype and all the other experiences you've had in your career as an investor and an entrepreneur advisor, if someone here is looking to launch a product online or improve the way it's kind of marketed online, what's one thing you recommend they do?
Well, we at Prehype have been using a lot of a methodology we call signal mining. It's described in the book. And it's basically figuring out what is the smallest experiment that you can come up with that can give you a little bit of incremental data that your idea is worth something. And so when I wrote the book, I didn't know what cover to put on. And so I make 30 of them, and I bought Amazon ads against those 41s, and I saw what people would, which one they would click on and which one they would give me their email address to get notified when the book was out. And so I could kind of I guess I had to be creative to figure out the 20, 30, 40 different versions, but I didn't have to be very creative to pick the ones because, some of them rose to the top and some of them didn't. And so I just had to pick some of the ones that where customers have voted with their clicks was the best one.
Awesome. Well, Henrik, thank you very much for joining us today. And, very much appreciate the perspectives. And I think everybody did as well. So awesome. Have a nice day.
Best of luck with the conference. It's exciting so far.
Yeah, thank you.